The Tennessee Titans are coming to town tomorrow, and it's going to be one hell of a fight.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And if you don't know me, I'm your very, very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. the Jolly Green Giant, a.k.a. the iron that sharpens the iron, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for almost 2 decades. Formerly at falcfans.com, RIP, still going strong. Been going strong for almost an entire decade as a host of Locked On Falcons, and I appreciate each and every one of you that goes strong with me as everydayers. That means you make this humble podcast your first listen each and every day, and all you have to do to become an everydayer, subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today we are talking about the 2 latest pickups for the Atlanta Falcons on the roster and what they're adding to the table. We're going to be talking about linebacker Ronnie Harrison and center Jake Hansen. But first, we got to start with what is going to be the big topic for the next 2 days surrounding Atlanta Falcons training camp, which is the upcoming joint practices. 2 days of joint practices here in Atlanta between the Atlanta Falcons and those pesky Tennessee Titans, those boys from Nashville. All right, straight out of Cashville, as Young Buck would say. But, of course, Locked On Titans will also be covering the other half of this from the Titans' perspective over the next couple of days. And if you want to get caught up on all the latest going on with the Tennessee Titans, how Cam Ward looked in his first preseason action, of course, our good buddy Tyler Rowland will have you covered over at Locked On Titans, which, of course, you can find on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. But I think a big topic of discussion over these next 48 hours is going to be, the QB battle, right? That's a big topic of discussion in Titans camp, which is, how is number 1 overall pick Cam Ward, right? He is the future, right? He is the Kwiatk's Haderach, at least up there in Nashville, similar to our Lisan Al-Gaib down here in Atlanta in Michael Penix. We're not going to get a head-to-head, but it's going to be a back and forth as we go to practice. Who's going to look better? 2, very talented quarterbacks, and who's going to have the better days. And, that's going to be at no point taken out of context or overreacted or over-exaggerated or any of those things over the next 2 days. Everybody's going to be very level-headed every time that Michael Penix or Cam Ward, makes a throw, misses a throw, all that stuff and more. And so we'll be looking forward to seeing how stifling this Falcons defense can be against a rookie quarterback like Cam Ward. Will we see Michael Penix carve up the Titans defense, as we have seen him at times carve up this Falcons defense? And particularly some of the challenges that the Titans defense is going to present to this Falcons offense alongside Michael Penix is with those challenges up front. Obviously, they have one of the best D tackles in football in Jeffrey Simmons. They have an up-and-coming hoss of a human being in Tavondre Sweat. And then, of course, there's pesky old Arden Key, right? You may recall Arden Key having quite a day against Caleb McGarry the last time the Falcons and Titans faced each other, which was that Week 8 loss by the Atlanta Falcons to the Titans in 2023, the Will Levis game. Fortunately for the Falcons, we will not see Will Levis show out with him out for the season. But that game also featured 2 years ago, Jeffrey Simmons having a dominant day against Matthew Bergeron and Chris Lindstrom, particularly in the first half. And you can argue single-handedly got Desmond Ridder benched, although we know Desmond Ridder certainly contributed to his benching, but they were really destroying the Falcons front. And, that going back to those days, when Matthew Bergeron was a rookie, it was one of the reasons why I've been lower on Matthew Bergeron than many others over the last couple of years, because, we saw in that game in particular, as well as others in the first half of his rookie season, him kind of being a liability in some of those matchups. He's come a long way since, but, these next 2 days of practice will tell us just how far along he has come, as along with the rest of the Falcons offensive line. And so this is kind of the thing I'm looking forward to seeing over the next couple of days, the battle in the trenches, literal battle in the trenches, more on that later. But it's one of the reasons why you don't hear me touting this Falcons offensive line to the degree that others often do, touting it as one of the best offensive lines in football. It's certainly one of the better offensive lines in football, but it's hard for me, at least, to heap too much praise on this unit collectively, because whenever they face a Jeffrey Simmons caliber player or a really strong defensive line, there's a tendency for them to kind of get exposed and wrecked a little bit. And we saw that in that 23 game with Jeffrey Simmons, Danico Autry, Arden Key. We saw that last year against TJ Watt and the Steelers. Now, fortunately for the Falcons, they kind of dodged some of the other bullets that they potentially could have faced with Derek Brown and Micah Parsons and Max Crosby and Dexter Lawrence all being injured last year. And so the Falcons didn't necessarily have to deal with those guys. But, this battle in the trenches this week is going to be one of the more intriguing battles that we're going to see this week. It's not a true game setting, but it's going to be closer than what we're going to get for this, particularly this Falcons starting offensive line, because we know they're not going to play in the preseason. So this is going to be the closest thing that we have to see where this offensive line stands before we get to September. So I'm looking forward to seeing how these guys deal with Jeffrey Simmons. And that's going to lead to both sides being a little amped up. The Titans had joint practices last week against the Bucs. There were some scrapes involving Jeffrey Simmons and the Bucs 2023 second round pick Cody Mock, as far as I am aware. And I'm thinking we're going to see similar scrapes over the next 2 days that may or may not involve Matthew Bergeron, our 2023 second round pick, who's primed to be right in the middle of this. I know at least in one of the joint practices over the last 2 years the Falcons have had with the Dolphins, Bergeron was involved in some fights. I want to say he's been involved in fights in these joint practices in each of the last 2 summers. And then, this was even before Bergeron. You go back, 3 summers ago, when the Falcons went all the way up to New York or New Jersey, I guess, to practice against the Jets. That was basically all it was just people fighting at that point in time. And so, I said on the Falcons squad show over at Locked On Sports Atlanta earlier on Monday, I'm setting the over under of 3 fights, tomorrow potentially. Right. And I say, take the over, man. Right? We're going to get at least one from Matthew Bergeron. We're going to get at least one from James Pierce. Then there's going to be some random guy, I don't know, Felipe Franks or somebody like that gets into a fight. And then that 4th fight, right? When you hit the over, right? That's going to be the one that cancels practice or, causes all hell to break loose or whatever. So that's the thing I'm going to be keeping an eye on. We'll see how it all goes, right? When I said at the top of the show, it's going to be a hell of a fight, I meant that literally. So we will see on that front. Some of the other things that we will be on the lookout for over the next couple of days is, we've talked before about how Raheem Morris prefers the 11-on-11 because you can kind of simulate pass rush. Well, the Titans tend to like to do a lot of 7-on-7 instead. That doesn't necessarily simulate that. And so hopefully the Falcons will compensate if they don't necessarily have those battles in the trenches during team sessions as much as we have seen in Falcons practice. If they do 7-on-7 stuff, and Raheem has already talked about how, we're going to see 7-on-7 during these joint practices, because again, that's one of the things that Brian Callahan and the Titans like to do. Hopefully they'll compensate with some one-on-ones, right? Where this offensive line and defensive line can go head to head between the Titans and Falcons and make up for what we may not get necessarily in some of these team drills. So that will be something that we'll keep an eye on. And obviously we'll be paying attention to who wins those one-on-ones. And hopefully the Falcons will not put it on the far field. Jarvis has already said, Jarvis Davis of Locked On Sports Atlanta, he's already said he's got his binoculars packed because he knows what the Falcons are going to wind up doing. So we will see on that front. Another thing that is just going to be interesting, fun little tidbit is, we'll see the return of a couple of Falcons down to Atlanta. I don't know if there's any current Falcons that are former Titans, except for maybe Josh Thompson, the 3rd string safety for the Falcons, if I'm not mistaken. But we do have some former Falcons that are in Tennessee. Unfortunately, not Lorenzo Carter, because he did retire earlier this summer, but Van Jefferson, of course, our guy, Calvin Ridley, Joe Gaziano. You remember Joe Gaziano, right? And you guys remember Timmy Horn, right? You remember you were wondering hey, whatever happened to Timmy Horn? Yeah, he's in Tennessee right now. So we will see on that front, but looking forward to the next 2 days of coverage here on Locked On Falcons on these joint practices. Of course, Tyler Rowland of Locked On Titans will be covering it as well from the Titans angles. But, the Tennessee Titans aren't going to be the only new faces in Atlanta this week. We got a couple of additions to the Falcons roster, and we'll break those down, starting with linebacker Ronnie Harrison. and what he's bringing to the table on defense. So today's episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. With the NFL kickoff right around the corner, fantasy football is back in full swing, and this year Yahoo Fantasy is turning things up with a fantasy football experience like never before. This year, I'm playing on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too. Whether you're a first-timer or you're a veteran playing in your millionth league, and I've been a Yahoo Fantasy user for almost 2 decades, and the updates that they're rolling out this month are, pun intended, fantastic. And to celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over the 28 days throughout the month of August. And to kick it all off, they just dropped the Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues, a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated each week until there's just one team left standing. And with the season around the corner, now's the time to get your league together and give this new mode a try. If you're more into the classics, don't worry, you can still play in a head-to-head private league or join a public league. Stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy now at yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. So we heard the news that the Falcons had signed Ronnie Harrison over the weekend, safety, longtime safety in the NFL, but our guy D. Orlando Ledbetter over at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution on Monday reported that Harrison was getting work with the linebackers, rocking good old number 36. And, it's notable to me because I had a suspicion that when the Falcons signed Harrison, right, that maybe they were planning on playing him at linebacker because they worked him out back, I believe, last Tuesday with like 3 other linebackers. And typically when you bring in guys for tryouts, you bring in guys that all play the same position. And so it's notable to me, right? And we've talked over the last week of the lack of depth that the Falcons have had at inside linebacker. We saw Harrison when he was with the Indianapolis Colts the last 2 seasons, but particularly in 2023, he did dabble as a linebacker, including in that game, that Taylor Heineke game, right? After Desmond Ritter's second benching. We're talking a lot about Desmond Ridder. Oh, we'll get some Easton Stick mentions on today's episode before we're done. Or at least I'll do my best to insert them so that I can wash that bitter taste of Desmond Ridder out of your mouth. But we did see in that 2023 game between the Colts and Falcons that Harrison, that was one of the games that Harrison did play that season as a linebacker. And we've talked before, as I mentioned, with the Falcons needing bodies at that inside linebacker position, with Caden Ellis and Divine Diablo, the Falcons' 2 starting linebackers, not participating in the preseason. We know that's not going to be the case. All right. They basically leaves them with 4 healthy linebackers until today, until this Harrison signing, where J.D. Bertrand is dealing with presumably concussion, an undisclosed injury, but he's basically in a yellow non-contract jersey over the last week, which usually is an indicator of concussion-like symptoms, and he missed time last year due to a concussion. Troy Anderson being on the PUP list, and so who knows when he's coming back. Malik Verdon being on the non-football injury list, who knows when he's coming back. And then, D-Led also reported on Monday that he didn't spot Caleb Johnson, one of those 4 healthy linebackers at practice. So we'll see if that's also another issue. And so we saw this kind of manifest itself, this lack of depth on Friday night against the Lions, where the Falcons played a lot of 3-4 bear fronts as their base defense rather than the 4-3 over fronts that we have been talking about for 6 weeks on this podcast as the new base look and the new look for this Falcons defense. Why? Because you only need 2 inside linebackers in the 3-4, but in a base defense at least, rather than in a 4-3, you need 3 inside linebackers or 3 off-ball linebackers, stack linebackers in that 4-3 over front. And so therefore, the Falcons just didn't have enough bodies to play 4-3. At least that's my theory. I think once we get to the regular season, we'll see that 4-3 over take over as their base defense and get truly unveiled. Until then, the Falcons are playing their cards close to the chest, close to the vest, however you say that. But we will probably still see, some bare fronts this upcoming season as part of the multiplicity of this defense, giving different looks, right? The Jets love to use those bare fronts in short yardage situations. Over the last couple of years, it allows you to sort of clog the interior while you still also have those edges out wide to take advantage of their pass rushing ability. And for those of you not familiar with a bare front, it's basically a 3-4 forefront, right? Where you have 5 guys on the line of scrimmage, you have the outside linebackers lined up on the outside, and then you have a pair of 3 techniques lined up in the B gap over the outside shoulder of both guards, and then you have a nose tackle lined up over the center, and it basically, again, allows you to clog the middle of the run while also, having those guys outside the, as we talk about in this 4-3 over this wide 9 defense, you also, can limit the outside run and whatnot. So I think Harrison has a chance to potentially stick and make a name for himself as a linebacker on this roster because of how many players are hurt, right? Talk about Troy Anderson. We went into training camp being like, there are 4 guys that are locks to make this roster as linebackers, and then there's potentially an open competition for that 5th spot. But Troy Anderson was one of those guys that we considered to be one of the 4 locks. And then the question is, with him being on the PUP list and Raheem Morris being asked about it last week and basically not giving us a true timetable on when he'll come off that PUP list, there's a chance that Troy Anderson will not count towards the 53-man roster at the beginning of the season because he'll be on the PUP list, which is at that point essentially the short-term IR, where he'll miss at least the first 4 games of the season on the regular season version of that PUP list. And then, of course, we're sitting here wondering, like, is J.D. Bertrand going to be healthy for the regular season? Again, clearly the Falcons are trying to get him there, but you never know, right? And so then you have a lot of openness behind Caden Ellis and Divine Diablo, right? And that's where D'Angelo Malone and Josh Woods, right now, based off of how things stacked on Friday night against the Lions, they would probably be the 4th and 5th guy if we're counting Bertrand as the 3rd guy. And we'll see on Troy Anderson. But again, I think we'll see plenty of opportunities for Ronnie Harrison to get reps over the next 2 weeks, right? He'll be a little bit behind the 8 ball, so that's going to probably show out this week. But he'll, be able to really unleash that ability probably in that preseason finale, not this week against the Titans, but next week against the Dallas Cowboys, because at that point in time, the Falcons will probably be like, okay, all the guys that we want to be on this roster, we're going to limit their opportunities in that preseason finale. And so Ronnie Harrison, that will be the best opportunity for him to make a name for himself. Hopefully he'll be caught up with the defense and being able to make some plays at that linebacker position. So we will see what Ronnie Harrison brings to the table, but he wasn't the only new addition that the Falcons made over the weekend, picking up backup offensive lineman Jake Hansen as well on Sunday. And we'll break down if Jake Hansen also has a chance to make this roster as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So August 26th is officially a brand new holiday. It is FanDuel Futures Day. And this is the perfect holiday for you football fans who live for the bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel gives on upcoming NFL season predictions. So whether you want to call your shot on who wins the MVP, right? Are you looking at Lamar Jackson getting his 3rd MVP? Or you're eyeing that long shot division winner? Maybe you're looking at a certain team in the NFC South that is not the favorite to win the division as a long shot. Or you're ready to crown your Super Bowl champ before week 1 even kicks off, right? Maybe you're looking at Lamar. Maybe you're looking at Josh Allen potentially dethroning Patrick Mahomes, or you're looking at some team that may be having joint practices against the Tennessee Titans this week as that dark horse Super Bowl team. It is time for you to celebrate FanDuel Futures Day. So if you're bullish on the Falcons, or even if you're not, this is the day to celebrate and win some cash. So head on over to FanDuel.com, download the FanDuel app today, and start planning your futures bets right now, because Futures Day is the one and only one day only. FanDuel, play your game. So yesterday we spent quite a bit of time at the end of the episode talking about our concerns about the Falcons' offensive line depth, contrasting that with some other people's concerns or other people's more pressing concerns in terms of the Falcons' cornerback depth. And by the time I finished that recording and checked the news, I'd seen that the Falcons had signed Jake Hansen. I was like, oh, okay. They did a thing, right? They did a thing that we said on that episode. I don't know if they're going to do, right? In signing a backup offensive lineman to come in and shake things up. Right. And Hansen's a guy that has center guard versatility. He spent the most recent years with the Jets, so very familiar with several of the Jeff Ulbrichts and the Mike Rutenbergs and all those guys that are ported over from that coaching staff. Prior to being with the Jets the last 2 seasons, he spent 3 or 4 years with the Green Bay Packers. Originally was a 6th-round pick with the Packers out of Oregon back in 2020. He started 7 career games across his NFL career in the last 3 years combined with the Packers and Jets, all of those starts have come at right guard, but his background is primarily as a center, right? He spent 4 years playing exclusively center at Oregon, and most of his preseason snaps, about 75% of his preseason snaps over the last 4+ years, have come at center. But he is a guy that has center guard flexibility, which is valuable, particularly when you're a backup offensive lineman. The more positions that you can play, the better for you. And he should be pretty comfortable playing in a zone scheme, given that experience with the Jets and Packers coming from West Coast offenses and whatnot. And so this is really a signing that's a shot across the bow of Jovaughn Gwyn, the Falcons' current backup center. Hanson is not an elite athlete by any means, but neither is Jovaughn Gwyn. And, talking about Jovaughn Gwyn, we haven't spent that much time talking about on this podcast over the last couple of years, since he was originally a 7th-round pick for the Falcons in 2023. But we knew when the Falcons drafted him back then, 2 years ago, that he was going to be a project, sort of transitioning from a right guard in college to a center in the NFL. We were coming then off that magical 2022 season where Falcons offensive line coach Dwayne Ledford had worked his magic, and we really believed in his ability to develop guys. So we were like, okay, you're going to take a flyer on Jovaughn Gwyn and see if you can develop him for a couple of years, right? Dwayne Ledford tried to recruit Jovaughn Gwyn to NC State when Ledford was an assistant coach there many years earlier than that. Seemingly believed that, hey, this guy's got that nastiness in him. And certainly, as a mean streak, Gwyn has that. Didn't have a whole lot else, in terms of plus traits on his film. But we were like, okay, maybe we can develop this, right? We've seen at that point in time, we've seen progress from a guy like Ryan Nuzul. And we sat there and said, hey, there's a chance that in a couple of years, when Drew Dahlman's rookie contract is up, you could have Jovaughn Gwyn as an insurance policy to potentially replace Drew Dahlman with some of the development that we were hoping to get from Jovaughn Gwyn over his first 2 years in Atlanta. And ultimately, that did not happen because Ryan Nuzul emerged as the guy that was capable and willing to step into that void. And now Nuzul is going to be the, projected, like any doubt, is going to be the Falcons starting center after starting 12 combined games over the last 2 years in Dahlman's, absence due to injuries. And so we've now, going into third summer for Jovaughn Gwyn, he's just failed to really make much of an impression. He didn't do so much in his first summer, but it was fine, right? That's the norm in the NFL, particularly for offensive linemen. It is a massive transition from college to the pros, just in that jump in competition from a technical standpoint, from the talent that you're facing on a near constant basis in the NFL. Like, the best pass rusher that you faced in college is often the third string guy in the NFL. And that's one of the reasons why going into the summer, we talked about this back in June when talking about Jack Nelson. We expected, he's going to have an up and down summer, right? We saw that reflected on Friday night against the Lions. But and it's one of the reasons why we've seen some of these clips of him getting worked by Jalen Walker in practice, right? And I saw another one, out there on Twitter today of Jack Nelson, who was getting some work with the ones at right tackle with Caleb McGarry getting a rest day. So that's, something that we expected to see and we'll continue to see from young offensive linemen. But, that's something the norm. But the key is you want to see that year 2 jump. We'll be looking forward to that with Jack Nelson potentially next year. We didn't get that for Jovaughn Gwyn, right? Almost every successful, whether we're talking offensive line or really any NFL player, right? The guys that have successful NFL careers typically make a big year 2 jump, right? We saw that along the offensive line, Chris Lindstrom, Caleb McGarry, Drew Dahlman, Ryan Nuzul, Matt Hennessy, Matthew Bergeron, etc. All those guys did it. Jovaughn Gwyn did not. And, that jump from year 1 to year 2 is instrumental to your success in the NFL. And then you expect, if you can make that jump, then there's potential for you to make a jump from year 2 to year 3. And that's where we get to the floor, ceiling, and eye level comparisons that we talk about constantly with these draft picks, where it's like you start out in the floor in year 1, then hopefully you make a jump to your eye level in years 2 or 3. And then hopefully in years 3 and beyond, you make that jump to reach your potential ceiling. And based off of Friday's game, it doesn't appear for the third summer in a row or the second summer in a row that Jovaughn Gwyn has made much of a leap. And based off of Jake Hanson's body of work in Green Bay and New York, right, appears to be an upgrade over Jovaughn Gwyn, because, again, we're looking around being like, what has Jovaughn Gwyn done in 3 years? And so now the Falcons have finally made a move in August that many of us thought and wanted to see this team make back in March, when we felt like, hey, you got to bring in some veteran depth behind Ryan Nuzul, if not to challenge Ryan Nuzul, just to give you an option, because again, based off of the 2 previous years, like what is Javon Gwynn offering to the table? And again, so far the answer has been not much. And again, we'll get plenty of opportunities, more opportunities to see Javon Gwynn and what he can do for the rest of the summer, but it's make or break season. So like I said, it's the shot across the bow for Javon Gwynn with this signing. And so, we talked about, back in March, got to rehash old stuff, right? Old complaints here on Locked On Falcons podcast. But we sat here in mid-March after that first wave of free agents being like, why are the Falcons running it back with all these backup offensive linemen that aren't that good, right? Remember when we talked about that, with Elijah Wilkinson and Kyle Hinton and Brandon Parker, and based off of what we saw on Friday night, it was like, man, that take has aged pretty well, right? And not signing a veteran center to come in and push Newsel and all that stuff. And, I know a lot of people thought this team was going to draft a center, right? When they didn't sign one, it was like, oh, well, they can't just let it lie in terms of the center position. And so now they're finally making the move, right? But we were willing, or I say we, I mean, y'all were willing, and me to a lesser extent, right? I never miss an opportunity to complain about the Falcons, but, we were willing to let it lie because we believed in Dwayne Ledford, right? He had earned up to this point the benefit of the doubt. Right. But this is one of the reasons why we sit here in March and be like, hey, where's the urgency? Right. You got to be proactive in March so that you can avoid needing to be reactive in August. Right. But that's the beauty of August. Right. There's still time before the season happens, because once the season hits, once September hits, it's pretty much done. Like you've made that bed and now you have to lie in it. And so yesterday's episode, we expressed skepticism over whether or not the Falcons would be proactive addressing their interior offensive line depth. But they were on today signing Jake Hansen, or at least yesterday signing Jake Hansen, and we'll continue to express our skepticism about this in the future, because clearly it seems to get under Terry Fontenot's skin, right? But we've seen this trend the last couple of years where we sit here in March and April being like, Terry, you going to make this move? Falcons, you're going to address this issue? And then the Falcons don't. And they're like, we're fine. We're going to do just fine. And then we get to August and they're like, you know what? We're going to address this issue. And it's part of the plan all along, at least if you're, a certain subset of the fan base that always believes like it's all Terry's, just got to let Terry cook, right? He's just been putting on simmer this entire time. And so we've seen some of these moves work out for the Falcons, these, preseason August moves, right? This, I guess it was technically a September move when they brought in Storm Norton 2 years ago, when we were sat here all summer long being like, you guys going to try to upgrade the swing tackle position? Because this is a major weakness. And then we saw last summer in August, they bring in Matthew Judon and Justin Simmons. That didn't quite live up to the hype. And now we're like, hey, where's that interior offensive line depth? And the Falcons are like, okay, we got it. Jake Hansen, right? So hopefully the Jake Hansen signing is much more like the Storm Norton signing than necessarily the Matthew Judon and Justin Simmons signings. And so, kudos to you, Terry, right? It's better late, right, than never, right? And so I'm just going to continue to be that annoying little brother, right? Be like, Terry, you're going to sign somebody? 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 He's like, all right, I'm going to sign somebody just to shut you up, Aaron. I'm like, oh, thank you, Terry. Thank you. Appreciate it. So we will see what Jake Hansen can add to this interior offensive line in this competition. We will see what other upcoming moves that we can annoy Terry into making here on this illustrious podcast. So make sure you continue to check us out by subscribing or following for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And of course, guys, if you want to see some of the currency, right? You don't want to hear me complain about the offensive line, but you want to see me complain about the offensive line by looking at some of the all-22 film from Friday night's action against the Detroit Lions, including highlighting some missed blocks from Javon Gwynn and others that led to the Falcons being like, we got to do something here, right? You can do so by checking out that all-22 breakdown by becoming a Locked On Falcons Insider at the link in the description below at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons. You can get that access for free. We did almost a full hour, 54-ish minutes on the Lions game, looking at Jack Nelson, the other offensive lineman, as well as the other 4 rookies in the track class. You might have heard of James Pierce or Jalen Walker. And of course, we sprinkled in a couple of Easton Stick, outstanding big time throws in there in that all 22 breakdown. So if you want to get a look at what this rookie class looked like and some of the concerns up front on the offensive line and why we're optimistic about Jack Nelson, because it's like, hey, we knew Jack was going to struggle, but guess what? Like, he didn't struggle as much, or relatively speaking, the fact that he's showing improvement across a game, while we got these 3 and 5 and 8 year veterans that are struggling and not showing improvement. And like, well, hey, Arrow's pointing up for Jack Nelson. Arrow's pointing down for the rest of these guys. Like, they got no excuses. Jack Nelson at least is a rookie. But if you want to get into that, you can hit that up at the link in the description below. 14-day free trial. You can check that out for free. And then if you want to keep it, pay $4.99 a month, and you'll get extended all 22 breakdowns for every game this upcoming season, as well as a Locked On Falcons insider, as well as, being able to hit me up and be like, Aaron, what are you going to complain about today in the podcast? And I'm like, hey, I've been thinking about, some other position that we can complain, all that sort of stuff anymore. So check it out at the link in the description below and become a Locked On Falcons insider. But that's going to do it for us here today, guys, as your first listen. For your second listen, again, if you're looking forward to that FanDuel Futures Day, who's going to get you prepped for the next 2 weeks in the lead up between now and August 26th. It's the Locked On Bets podcast. Kevin Rogers, Lee Sterling, the betting experts that are going to give you lots of football futures to plan ahead for Football Futures Day 2 weeks from now, as well as MLB locks to get that extra cash in your pocket between now and then. It is all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.